Ma'am, I think you were going.
What role does competition play here? Do the co-ops compete with each other? Do they compete against the regular corporations? Or what keeps them from becoming cutthroat in order to win?
Good question. Again, I'm going to use a concrete example rather than a hypothetical. I'm going to use Mondragon because it is a very rich source. And there are loads of books and articles on Mondragon, including on our website, democracyatwork.info, where we gather all this material, all of which is available to you at your leisure, at no cost, and so on. Here's how Mondragon has done it. Mondragon's first commitment is to preserve jobs. It's very interesting. When you ask them, what is your bottom line? The answer is jobs. So if, for example, and I'll take an example from them, one of their successful production lines is the Fagor, F-A-G-O-R. It's fairly well known in Europe and around the world. It produces washing machines, appliances like that. And the Fagor washing machine company has suffered from the international crisis like everybody else, and so the demand for these washing machines has fallen. So they had about 2,500 workers in the town of Mondragon at this factory, and they couldn't use 600 or 700 of them. There wasn't a demand for it. So the question is, what do you do? And they have a two-step answer. First answer, we are going to share the pain. In other words, if you don't need 600 or 700 workers, the other way of saying that is you don't need as many hours of labor because there's no point in producing the machines you can't sell. But the question is, why would you want to impose the need to cut back on an all-or-nothing basis? Why would a person either be employed or unemployed? Because if what you want is X hundred hours less labor, then it could be that everybody does 2 hours a week less. That would be what's called sharing the burden of unemployment. So the first rule they have is you never impose the unemployment exclusively on a subset of people. That is fundamentally unjust and creates terrible tensions inside the union. If any of you are members of the union, you know this, between the workers who are bitter that they lost everything, particularly when many employers will then impose overtime on the workers still working rather than bring back somebody who's unemployed. So that's the first rule. Second rule is, if there are workers that really are redundant because nothing more can be done in this area, or that we've got to a limit of how much we can share the unemployment, then we will find work for those people in another co-op, because the Mondragon is a parent company of hundreds of co-ops, and they do that. They're very proud that in the current climate of Spain, for those of you that are not familiar with it, Spain is now the worst economic downturn of modern Spanish history, the worst in Europe, 25% unemployment. The unemployment rate in Spain today is what it was at the worst of the Depression in the 1930s. Young people between the ages of 18 and 30 have a 50% unemployment. Half of them are not working, cannot find work. But not in Mondragon. Mondragon hasn't fired anybody. Between the sharing of the unemployment and moving workers around, because that's part of what makes them one company, they have held on. They're becoming more popular than ever because they've been able to do that. They have another rule, and that rule is whenever a member co-op buys anything, if they can get a better machine or whatever they're buying, or a cheaper one, outside the co-op, they are told to do it. We have to be competitive, because otherwise we will die. That's their recognition that they live in a capitalist world and they have to be able to compete. And so they do. The Fagor company, it's a bigger building than this. I toured it this summer. It's actually like a football field, but inside, like a big airplane hangar. And it has one huge machine because it's highly automated. And that machine is German. comes from Germany, from a German capitalist enterprise, which makes this kind of machine that they use. And we asked them, why didn't you buy it from one of your own? And the answer is the Germans make a better machine. It's a better deal. And that's the rule. So we have to succeed in a capitalist world, but we can do it. And this is perhaps the most interesting thing, because there's all kinds of advantages we have that a capitalist enterprise doesn't. And they gave me examples. Number one, if you're a capitalist enterprise, the price you charge for something has to cover your labor costs, your material costs, and all like that. But it also has to cover something else. The profits you pay out to your shareholders. So with a big grin on their face, they say, we don't have any of those. We don't have to charge that kind of price. We're not a profit-driven enterprise. So we can bring our price down because we don't have to make a profit. They also say we don't pay our top executives a wild amount of money, and so we don't have to have a higher price to bring in the revenue that pays these people these outlandish salaries. So we can do something that they can't do. Second argument, when every worker is a director and every worker understands the problems of competition, every worker is constantly engaged. Every worker is looking for a way to save a buck, to cut a corner, to figure out a way of doing things better. And you're given a lot of recognition and celebration if you come up with a cost saving. A worker in a capitalist enterprise isn't thinking about that. He's thinking about happy hour. But it's very important, because the everyday flood of technical innovation is much more important than the occasional big breakthrough by the scientist. It's all those little things that are cared for by people. And this is an old American idea, it's the old idea. If you're invested in it, if it's your little business, if it's your home, you take care of it better than if it isn't. If it's your business in the fullest sense of the word, you have more. Then he gave another example. He says, we are rooted in the community. When something is wrong at the factory, every worker goes and tries to figure out whether the neighborhood they live, there's somebody who knows something about that, who could maybe solve that problem, or someone who's had a similar problem in their line of work. We bring in the entire community because it's all of us. We're not, to use a modern term, we're not alienated from the workplace, the way a worker in capitalism is. And so we have a whole raft of these advantages that give us a chance to outcompete a capitalist on many occasions. And Mondragon is again a paradigm case. They are the 7th biggest corporation in Spain. They have outcompeted all kinds of capitalist enterprises. By the way, just to give you an idea that might surprise you, Mondragon has partners, people, enterprises in other countries that admire what they do in certain areas and partner with them. They have labs to develop new techniques. I'll give you the name of 2 partners you'll recognize: General Motors and Microsoft. They can help each other. Microsoft gets some of the technological stuff that Mondragon is ahead, and Mondragon gets from Microsoft. Might surprise you. So they're quite able. They're quite confident. They can compete. Give them half a chance. They can compete. Our Arizmendi bakeries are doing fine in San Francisco. And so is the Yellow Cab Company. And so are many, many others. In Amherst, Massachusetts, because I taught most of my adult life as a professor at the University of Massachusetts, there's a little copy shop that was set up 25 years ago called Collective Copies, hint. And they are a worker co-op, and they've been wonderfully successful. And one of the reasons is they appeal to the university. They use lots of students as part-time jobs, and they cultivated a reputation, and they're willing to go an extra mile for a student who's jammed up and needs something at 3 in the morning. They do some things that cultivate a relationship with the community, and they outcompeted Kinko. Things like that. And they were able to do that. And again, I understand these are isolated small examples, but I want to remind you, capitalism comes into the world beginning with isolated small examples, and those have to be struggled over and reproduced and grown, and then something else is possible. Another way to put this, and it goes back to your question about the unions, I like to use a parallel with slavery. There are two ways to react to slavery, and you always see whenever there's a struggle against slavery, as there was in this country in the 19th century with our slavery in the southern states. One response to slavery of people who are critical of it is to work very hard to improve the conditions of slaves. Feed them better, clothe them better. Don't allow their families to be ripped apart in the slave market. All those things we understand. And the movement, the critical movement against slavery all over the United States, including the South, often took the form of a desire to improve the condition of the slaves. But then there was always another wing of the criticism of slavery, the abolitionists, who looked at the first group and said, "Are you kidding? The problem isn't that they're not well fed or well clothed. The problem is that they're slaves. And even if we had a big struggle, and even if we were successful in improving the conditions of the slaves, as long as they're still slaves, it's always possible for the master to take back whatever improvements in the conditions you were able to extract from him. The way to break out is to end the institution of slavery." And there was a big struggle in the United States between these two groups. In the end, Lincoln went and abolished slavery. Well, it's really the same issue now, isn't it? Either we work real hard to improve the conditions of working people, their wages, their salaries, their benefits, or we say, wait a minute, the problem isn't the conditions. The problem is that they're an employee of somebody else who's the employer. And even if we get the benefits, the employer can and will take them away. I already did that 40 minutes ago when I explained to you that what was won by workers in a reform movement in the 1930s, higher taxes on the rich, Social Security, unemployment, government jobs, all of that was then taken away. You can't leave it then that way. The first time you try this and it's taken away, call it a learning experience. But if all that is done now is to do it again, then it isn't shame on them for taking it back. It's shame on us for not having learned the lesson. That's why having the alternative, which can succeed competitively, is crucial to opening up the space to think a little more ambitiously than another round of reformist improvements that will be taken away. That's a key part of what this movement is about. Other question, please.
So what is the new party in Germany doing? How is it different than the communist and socialist parties that are all over Europe, and does it have anything to do with co-ops?
Yes, the name of the party in Germany is called the Die Linke. Die is the, and Linke is the German word for left. They didn't want there to be any ambiguity about where they were coming from, so they basically called themselves the Left Party, Die Linke. And it is a party that came together out of two other parties. First was the left wing of the Social Democratic Party, the old established socialist party that has been in the government. Last leader of Germany before Angela Merkel, the current leader, was a man named Schroeder, and he was a member of the Social Democratic Party in Germany. The left wing, under a very, very charismatic leader, which was important, a man named Oscar Lafontaine, withdrew from the Socialist Party in order to found this new party, the Die Linke. The other part of the Die Linke is the party that used to be the dominant party in what was East Germany. You know, the East German and West German separation ended, and the two countries were unified early in the 1990s. So there's now one Germany again, there aren't two. But in the East, which was a communist part of the Eastern European bloc, that party was called the Socialist Unity Party, SED, Sozialistische Einheitspartei, and that party dissolved, but large numbers of it moved also into this Linke, so it's a coalition. In the eastern part, there's something Americans tend not to know for reasons having to do with our newspapers and our media. In Eastern Europe, in Eastern Germany, the mass of people still vote for that party. So that party runs a number of the regional governments. In Germany, they don't call them states like we do, 50 states. They call them Länder, lands. So many of the Länder in eastern part of Germany are governed by this Die Linke party now, and increasingly they become powerful in the West. As I said, the last national election, they got 11.9% of the vote. 1 out of 8 Germans votes for a party that one of whose slogans is Germany can do better than capitalism. I like to talk about that party, not because it's the same as what we would do here in the United States, but it's an important lesson. The notion that a party could develop politically in a modern, highly industrialized, advanced country, which Germany surely is, that is critical of capitalism, you don't have to imagine that as maybe a possibility. There it is. And Germany, by the way, is the #1 economy in Europe right now. Its unemployment has gone down over the last 5 years, whereas almost everybody else's has gone up. Germany was a strong economy before. It's much stronger now. It is really the center of the European, the Eurozone, the European Common Market. So in a relatively successful capitalist economy, the critique of capitalism has a very big resonance in a very large part of the society. And the resonance is magnified because of German law. And let me say a word about that too, again for American audiences, very important. Under German law, every political party that gets more than 5% of the vote gets 2 things. One, you get seats in parliament. They do not have the American system of winner take all. You know, if the Republicans get 51% and the Democrats get 49%, the Republicans get it, and vice versa. All European countries have what's called proportional representation. You get as many seats in the parliament as you get percentage vote in the population. The idea is if 20% of the people believe what you believe as a party, you should not just be able to run, but you should be able to participate in making the laws. Otherwise, those people aren't represented. It's a kind of idea of, I don't know, democracy. Because you're not going to exclude 20% of the people, which you do if the winner takes all. And by the way, in the United States, we do that sometimes. Some of the primaries of the 2 parties are, you know, if you read that Ron Paul got X% and Romney got Y%, then they each get a certain number of delegates. That's proportional representation. And we've had that in elections in the United States too, but we got rid of it. The Europeans have it. So in Germany, when the Die Linke party got 12% of the vote, they get 12% of the seats in the parliament. So 12% of the people who are in the parliament are members of a party that believes that Germany can do better than capitalism. Highly successful capitalist economy produces a criticism. And if you get more than 5%, not only do you get your seats, and that's true in the Länder, in the state legislatures too, but you get something else. You get money from the government, because the democratic idea in Germany is if you get more than 5% of the people interested in what you have to say, then it is important that you have a platform in which to explain to people what your positions are, what your proposals are, so that the population can make an informed vote. And so the government allocates money, which is given to the party for educational purposes to bring its view of what's going on to the population. The Die Linke therefore qualifies. And they get money from the German government. How much money? 80 million euros. That's a lot of money. And they set up a foundation, which all parties that get 5% or more. And you know what the name of their foundation is? The Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. If any of you are not sure who that is, ask me and I will explain it. Rosa Luxemburg, a revolutionary in German history, that's the name of their foundation. And they give money to people all over the world to study concepts critical of capitalism. They've just opened an office in New York City. They have offices in many countries around the world. They have opened an office for work here in the United States to meet with and exchange ideas of criticism of capitalism with interested Americans. Hello? I can see from your faces you're interested. One more fact about Germany. There's a law. Every company that has more than 2,000 workers employed must have 50% of the board of directors elected by the workers. It's the law in Germany. They're the most successful capitalist country in Europe. And they give more power to their workers than any other one. The notion that if you were to do that, you would cripple the capitalist potential. It's the same silly argument that says, gee, those Europeans, they're just not doing real well because they have such a big social safety net. National health for everybody, basically free public higher education and all the rest. Germany has one of the most expansive programs of welfare for its people, and it's the most successful country. Their unemployment is significantly lower than that in the United States. But on the other hand, of course, for a German worker, like for most European workers, being unemployed, it doesn't have the meaning it does here. Because since they all have a national health system, you get your national health whether you have a job or not. When you lose your job, you do not lose your health insurance. You can't lose your health insurance. It's yours by right of citizenship. But I wouldn't want to go into that because you wouldn't want to get Americans upset.